We'll leave this location at this point and go live now to the Senate floor. Senators have returned from their weekly party lunches to debate a small business funding bill. Live coverage now of the U.S. Senate. Well, the Senate's in a quorum call waiting for lawmakers to come to the floor. Majority Leader Harry Reid has come to the hall to make remarks. He started just a moment ago.
from one baseline?
We're both working from the same baseline. We're at 51. This would be another 19 billion. Other than extremely good. Yes.
House Republicans have said that they would be willing to go to a lower number if you accepted some of the policy riders. Are you open to that?
We're happy to look at the policy writers. There aren't many of them that excite me. But we're willing to look at it. In fact, we've already started looking at some of the policy writers.
In relation to the military activity in Libya?
We're having a briefing tomorrow at 5 o'clock, classified briefing, Secretary Clinton, Secretary Gates, and Admiral Mullen. I've told my caucus, come loaded with all your questions, ask questions in this classified setting, and then if, in fact, you want to do more legislatively, you're entitled to do that. The War Powers Act that we believe is valid is very clear, setting forth timelines that I read to my caucus today.
Senator Reid, when can we expect a vote on the 1099 repeal?
The question is, when can we expect a vote on the 1099 repeal? Hopefully this afternoon. And then we hope to be able to get the EPA done in the morning.
Yeah, why are you holding those votes? Is it simply to discuss those for the year, for long term, or for what at this point?
Why am I holding the votes? Because people offered amendments. That's why I'm holding the votes.
The amount that are expected to pass at this point, can you comment on that?
Well, I'm not sure that's true. No.
You said the $6 billion offer, what part of that might be mandatory spending entitlements?
Well, we have a good breakdown. It doesn't all come from the domestic discretionary side. Yes.
You feel that Democrats have given several steps towards the Republicans on this, and now you're about the halfway point with them, is your latest offer to them. Is that the end for you? Will you not take any steps?
I think we're far more than halfway. Their proposal was 76, we're at 70. That's way close to that.
Is that your last offer to the Republicans?
I'm not in the last offer business. I've been around here too long to do that. One last question.
Do you think you would need to have an agreement in order to be able to pass the bill prior to the current CR expiring, and do you think that's possible at this time?
Oh yeah, sure. We have, it expires a week from Friday. We've got loads of time. But it is, but you know, without trying to be cute here, time is running out. It takes a while to get things done because the House, they have to get a rule and they have to give the notice, and then over here it's difficult for us to get a bill up sometimes. So time's really becoming very, very important.
Will the amendment for McConnell go first?
We don't have the order yet.
If none of them work, are you going to hold additional votes on them?
Majority Leader Reid with the latest on the negotiations for the federal budget and votes on the 1099 repeal, which we heard senators discussing during general speeches earlier today. And before the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and a number of his fellow Republican lawmakers on the budget battle. They talked about jobs, energy, and Libya as senators returned from their weekly party meetings. In the meantime, negotiations continue over federal spending. Temporary government funding runs out on April 8th, leaving the possibility of a government shutdown. Several sources reporting now that the White House is crafting a proposal to cut an additional $20 billion from this year's spending on top of the $10 billion already cut by two short-term continuing resolutions. And we are back on the Senate floor now. Senators in a quorum call waiting for a lawmaker to come to the floor. This afternoon working on a small business bill that funds development of tech and research firms. Lawmakers working to determine a voting schedule for this afternoon. This is live coverage of the U.S. Senate.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I want to talk about our nation's financial troubles. Over the years, I have supported a balanced budget. I have supported amendments that did that. I have supported spending caps and spending cuts. And recently, we had an issue here on a proposal to fund the government for the remainder of the fiscal year. I voted against it because I felt like we needed to do more than what that amendment proposed. The fact is, we need to do much more. I agree that Congress should cut expenses, but, Mr. President, taking whacks at only 12% of the budget, that part of the budget that is the so-called discretionary spending, which is outside of defense, that is not part of the mandatory spending, such as all of the entitlement programs, and that's only 12% of the budget. And it includes funding for education and roads and bridges and medical research and NASA and environmental research. Even if you whacked all of that, it's still not going to solve the problem. And these things that we face today with this huge out-of-whack budget where we're spending so much more than we're taking in revenue, and the difference that we're going out and borrowing to pay the bills that are here but revenue only here, it's led us to the position that we're in, which is we're deep in debt. And cutting this domestic discretionary spending alone is barely a Band-Aid, let alone a real cure. What we need is a comprehensive long-term package. Mr. President, for example, when American families fall on hard times, they just don't cut back on going out for dinner and for seeing movies. The American family is forced to make wholesale lifestyle sacrifices. Or take, for instance, when a company, a corporation, faces the threat of bankruptcy, they don't only cut the salaries or stop buying office supplies. What they do is they go in and restructure entire delivery schemes and future investments. And in the same way, we just can't focus on slicing what is the conversation that's going on down in the House of Representatives right now, slicing one small part of the budget, which is discretionary spending, because that's not going to reduce the annual deficit and get at the national debt. We've got to do more. And even if we cut huge swaths of discretionary spending, including the programs that help those who need it most, our expenses for all the other programs in government, mandatory programs, are still growing exponentially. So everything's got to be on the table. Now, how in the world are we going to do this in the next 2.5 weeks? By the time the clock runs out on April the 8th, where we are faced with funding the government for the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year or not, how are we going to do it? What will it look like? if our debt keeps growing? Well, the federal government is going to have to start writing huge checks to our creditors. Who's a creditor? China is a creditor. And we're having to write for them huge checks on interest payments alone that won't have anything left to pay for things that we promised to our people, and no one else will want to lend us any more money. The money people have spent their lives paying into Social Security may not come back to them unless we can solve this budgetary crisis. Bonds that have been bought and held for decades will go down in value if we can't meet our debt obligations. And of course, if we don't get to the point that we can pay our debts, then the stock market could even have a worse crash than we had last time. So if we don't address this pending debt crisis now, our children and grandchildren could be sorely affected by the financial condition of this country in the future. Every economist that we've listened to lately has said that we need to provide certainty to our creditors and to the markets. In other words, that they need to know that we will get our debt under control before interest payments skyrocket, and whether our obligations are going to overwhelm us would certainly lend itself for us being in a financially uncertain position. No one knows how long we have before our creditors get nervous and start to make it harder for the U.S. to borrow money. But they all agree that we have to put into place a long-term plan instead of waiting to act until the crisis is upon us. The crisis is coming. It's coming on April the 8th. That's just the first crisis. Assuming that we can get through this and get the government funded for the remaining 6 months of the fiscal year until the end of September, the next crisis that's coming is the debt ceiling, probably in early June, that has to be raised in order for the government to pay its obligations. We're going to have a plan for next year's budget, the fiscal year that starts October the 1st. We're going to have a plan in place in order to get the votes to increase the debt ceiling. So between now and June, first in a couple of weeks, and then in a couple of months, we're going to have a comprehensive plan. Now, I'm going to support cuts across the board. I'm going to support cuts in discretionary spending, but I also want to see cuts in the equivalent of spending that we call tax expenditures that are nothing but outrageous tax breaks that we give, and I want to give you an example, in some of the royalty payments that are not being paid by oil companies for their privilege of extracting oil from federal lands, particularly those lands in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. There are corporations that ship massive amounts of jobs overseas, and they get tax breaks for it. And they make billions of dollars of profits each year for those activities. There are also foreign accounts, money that is made by U.S. citizens, that those foreign accounts are not reported here to the U.S., and tax is not being paid on that income coming in to a U.S. citizen. And so there's plenty of opportunity to tighten up And another place that we can tighten up is to implement the changes that we made in the health care bill that cut the fraud that plagues all of us in health care fraud, particularly Medicare and Medicaid fraud, and it's costing us billions and billions of dollars. So there are tireless efforts that are being made by a lot of senators right now trying to work together to draft a comprehensive plan. I came to the Senate to fight for my state and for our country. And if we continue to allow a debt crisis to happen, when in fact we had the opportunity to avoid it, it's going to be far more reckless than casting a vote that is going to be disliked by some. And I'm ready to stand and have that fight. And yet we shouldn't have to. We should, as the good book says, come, let us reason together. And then we can find a comprehensive solution to this budgetary crisis. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Will the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Arizona.
Some further proceedings on the quorum call be suspended, and I be recognized as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to take time today to address the ongoing situation in Libya. Last night, the President made a strong defense of our military action in Libya. I welcome his remarks, and I appreciate that he explained why this intervention was both right and necessary, especially in light of the unprecedented democratic awakening that is now sweeping the broader Middle East. There's been much criticism of the President's handling of the situation in Libya, some legitimate, some not. But the fact is, because we did act, the United States and our coalition partners averted a strategic and humanitarian disaster in Libya. Even as we seek adjustments to U.S. policy where appropriate to ensure that we accomplish the U.S. goal, as stated by the President, of forcing Gaddafi to leave power, I believe the President's decision to intervene in Libya deserves strong bipartisan support here in Congress and among all Americans. It's worth remembering, especially for the critics of this intervention, exactly what we would be facing in Italy now had we not taken action. Just over 1 week ago, Gaddafi was bearing down on Benghazi, a city of 700,000 people and the main seat of the Libyan opposition, as well as the provisional government that has now emerged. Gaddafi pledged, in his words, no mercy for these people. He pledged to go house to house, to crush everyone opposed to him. Had we not taken action in Libya, Benghazi would now be remembered in the same breath as Srebrenica, a scene of mass slaughter and a source of international shame. Libyan refugees would now be streaming into Egypt and Tunisia, destabilizing those critical countries during their already daunting political transitions. If we had allowed Gaddafi to slaughter Arabs and Muslims in Benghazi who were pleading for the U.S. military to rescue them, America's moral standing in the broader Middle East would have been devastated. Al-Qaeda and other violent extremists would have exploited the resulting chaos and hopelessness. The forces of counter-revolution in the region would have gotten the message that the world would tolerate the violent oppression of peaceful demonstrations for universal rights. This would have been a dramatic setback for the Arab Spring, which represents the most consequential geopolitical opportunity in centuries. That's why Libya matters, and why we were right to intervene. Yes, there are many other places in the world where evil resides, where monsters brutalize civilians. The United States cannot and should not intervene in all of these places. But we were right to do so in Libya because of the unique position that this country now occupies at a moment of historic change in the Middle East and North Africa. This does not mean we should take the same actions towards other countries in the region as we have toward Libya. Each of these countries is different. Their challenges and situations are different. When governments, both friend and foe, use force and oppression to crush peaceful demands for universal rights, we need to be clear in our condemnation, and we need to support the aspirations of all people who seek greater freedom, justice, and economic opportunity. But let's be clear. Gaddafi's brutal and vicious slaughter of fellow Arabs and Muslims has set Libya completely apart from other countries in the region, and it warranted the decisive military response that we and our international partners have taken. While some believe the President should have sought a congressional authorization for the use of force, or even a formal declaration of war prior to taking military action in Libya, I think his actions were in keeping both with the constitutional powers of the President and with past practices, be it President Reagan's action in Grenada or President Clinton's action in the Balkans. Had Congress taken even a few days to debate the use of force prior to acting in Libya, there would have been nothing left to save in Benghazi. That's why our founders gave the President the power as Commander-in-Chief to respond swiftly and energetically to crises. What we need now is not a debate about the past. That can come later. Many of us who wanted a no-fly zone at the time still are convinced that this could have been over by now. But the fact is, it's in the past. What we need is a forward-looking strategy to accomplish the U.S. goal, as articulated by the President, of forcing Gaddafi to leave power. We have prevented the worst outcome in Libya, but we've not yet secured our goal. As some of us has decisively and quickly reversed the momentum of Gaddafi's forces. But now we need to refine U.S. strategy to achieve success as quickly as possible. As every military strategist knows, the purpose of employing military force is to achieve policy goals. Our goal in Libya is that Gaddafi must go, and it is the right goal. But let's be honest with ourselves. We're indeed talking about regime change, whether the President wants to call it that or not. While I agree with the President that we should not send U.S. ground troops to Libya to remove Gaddafi from power, that is exactly what Libyan opposition forces are fighting to do. They are now on the outskirts of Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte, and they appear to have no intention of stopping there. Thus far, U.S. and coalition air power has cleared a path for the opposition to advance. UN Security Council Resolution 1973 authorizes the use of, quote, all necessary measures to protect civilians in Libya. As long as Gaddafi remains in power, He will pose an increasing danger to the world, and civilians in Libya will not be safe. Ultimately, we need to be straight with the American people and with ourselves. We are not neutral in the conflict in Libya. We want the opposition to succeed, and we want Gaddafi to leave power. These are just causes. And we must therefore provide the necessary and appropriate assistance to aid the opposition in their fight. That certainly means continuing to use air power to degrade Gaddafi's military forces in the field, and I'm encouraged by the fact that we are now bringing in AC-130 and A-10 attack aircraft to provide more close-in support. This is the Libyan people's fight, but we need to continue to help make it a fairer fight until Gaddafi is forced to leave power. I was very encouraged today to hear our ambassador to the United Nations suggest that the United States may provide arms to the opposition. We should also provide them, if requested and as appropriate, with resources, command and control technology, communications equipment, battlefield intelligence, and training. We need to take every responsible measure to help the Libyan opposition change the balance of power on the ground. Yes, it's been documented that many eastern Libyans went to fight in Iraq. Many met their end there, too. But Libyans are not rising up against Gaddafi now under the banner of al-Qaeda. To the contrary, they have largely pledged their support to the Transitional National Council, which is based in Benghazi and representative of tribes and communities across Libya. The leaders of this council are not unknown to us. They've met with senior administration officials, including the Secretary of State, as well as other world leaders. Their supporters are brave lawyers, students, and human rights advocates who just want to choose their own future free from Gaddafi. They have declared their vision for Libya as, quote, a constitutional, democratic civil state based on the rule of law, respect for human rights, and the guarantee of equal rights and opportunities for all its citizens. If these moderate democratic forces do not succeed in Libya, we know exactly who would fill the void: the radicals and the ideologues. We have seen this movie before. We cannot make the assumption the time is on our side. It is not. Perhaps Gaddafi's regime will crack tomorrow. I hope it will. But hope is not a strategy. If our strategy does not succeed in forcing Gaddafi to leave power sooner rather than later, we run the risk of prolonged and bloody stalemate. This is not in America's interest, nor in the interest of the Libyan people. The risks are still too high of repeating a similar outcome from the first Gulf War, where we had crushing sanctions and a no-fly zone in place. But still, Saddam Hussein managed to hold on to power, threaten the world, and brutalize his own people for another 12 years. Only then it took an armed invasion to remove him from power. That is not a definition of success in Libya, and it certainly is not a limited mission. It is a recipe for a costly and indefinite stalemate. We must avert that outcome. Our mission in Libya is going well, but we have not yet accomplished our goal. I am extremely thankful and grateful for our many friends and allies, especially our Arab partners, who are contributing to this mission. However, none of this is a substitute for sustained U.S. leadership. If our goal in Libya is worth fighting for, and I believe it is, then the United States must remain strongly engaged to force Gaddafi to leave power. Nothing less is desirable or sustainable. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Virginia.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with and that I be allowed to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was originally going to call up the pending amendment, Amendment 215, Senator Rockefeller's amendment. I'm informed that that amendment is at present the subject of some negotiation and a consent package, but I would like to speak briefly today in support of the amendment that has been filed by Senator Rockefeller, and on his behalf also, since he is away from the Senate today attending a funeral of a close friend. Like Senator McConnell, I've expressed deep reservations about the consequences of unilateral regulation of our greenhouse gases by the EPA. In my view, this will result in long and expensive regulatory processes that could lead to overly stringent and very costly controls on carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. This regulatory framework is so broad and potentially far-reaching that it could eventually touch nearly every facet of this nation's economy, putting unnecessary burdens on our industries and driving many businesses overseas through policies that have been implemented purely at the discretion of the executive branch and absent the clearly stated intent of the Congress. Our farms, our factories, our transportation systems, our power generating capacity, all would be subject to these new regulations. This unprecedented sweeping authority over our economy at the hands of the EPA is at the heart of Senator McConnell's concern, and ultimately, whichever way one ends up voting on his amendment, that common concern defines this debate. It's not a new concern for me. When this administration declared in November of 2009 that the President would sign a politically binding agreement at the United Nations Framework on Climate Change in Copenhagen, I strongly and publicly objected. I sent a letter to the President stating, quote, only specific legislation agreed upon in the Congress or a treaty ratified by the Senate could actually create such a commitment on behalf of our country. I've also expressed on several occasions my belief that this administration appears to be erecting new regulatory barriers to the safe and legal mining of coal resources in Virginia and in other states. My consistent message to the EPA is that good intentions do not in and of themselves equal the clear and unambiguous guidance from our Congress. We can see this in the approach the EPA has taken or attempted to take on the regulation of coal ash, on regulating industrial and commercial boilers, on approving new levels of ethanol into gasoline, and most importantly, its overreach to regulate greenhouse gases from stationary sources. I've repeatedly raised these issues with the administration and with my colleagues here in the Senate. In examining this issue, I've also reviewed carefully the Supreme Court's holding in Massachusetts versus EPA. My opposition to the EPA's present regulatory scheme with respect to carbon dioxide for stationary sources stems in part from my reading of this case. I am not convinced that the Clean Air Act was ever intended to regulate or to classify as a dangerous pollutant something as basic and ubiquitous in our atmosphere as carbon dioxide. I say that, Mr. President, as one of the few members of this body who is an engineer. To quote one of the most influential Supreme Court justices from the last century, Justice Cardozo, quote, the legislation which has found expression in this code is not canalized within the banks that keep it from overflowing. The case Justice Cardozo was commenting on dealt with a different issue, but the constitutional precept still applies. Congress should never abdicate or transfer to others the essential legislative function given to it and it alone by the Constitution. The sweeping actions that the EPA proposes to undertake clearly overflow the appropriate regulatory banks established by Congress, with the potential to affect every aspect of the American economy. Such action, in my view, represents a significant overreach by the executive branch. Notwithstanding these serious concerns with what I view as EPA's potentially unchecked regulation in a number of areas important to our economy, I do have concerns about the McConnell amendment for a number of reasons. First, Senator McConnell's resolution would jeopardize the progress that this administration has made in forging a consensus on motor vehicle fuel economy and emission standards. The Obama administration has brokered an agreement to establish the one national program for fuel economy and greenhouse gas standards. This agreement means that our beleaguered automotive industry will not face a patchwork quilt of varying state and federal emission standards. Significantly, this agreement is directly in line with the holding in Massachusetts v. EPA, which dealt with motor vehicle emissions, in fact, which dealt with new car motor vehicle emissions. Both in the Clean Air Act and in subsequent legislation enacted by the Congress, there's been a far greater consensus on regulation of motor vehicle emissions than on stationary sources with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. It's been estimated that these new rules, which are to apply to vehicles of model years 2012 to 2016, would save 1.8 billion barrels of oil and millions of dollars in consumer savings. That agreement, however, and the regulations that will effectuate it, both rest upon enforcement of the Clean Air Act, which would essentially be overturned by the McConnell Amendment. We have before us a different but equally effective mechanism to ensure that Congress and not unelected federal officials can formulate our policies on climate change and on energy legislation. Senator Rockefeller's amendment, which I have co-sponsored, would suspend EPA's regulation of greenhouse gases from stationary sources for 2 years. This approach would give Congress the time it needs to address our legitimate concerns with climate change, and yet would not disrupt or reverse the progress that has been made on motor vehicle fuel and emission standards. The Majority Leader had previously assured me and Senator Rockefeller of his commitment to bring the Rockefeller Amendment to the floor. I very much appreciate his stated intention today to do so. I hope we will have the opportunity to vote on this measure within the next day or so. Finally, I would like to say two things. First, let me say that I share the hope of many members of this body from both sides of the aisle that we can enact some form of energy legislation this year. I've consistently outlined key elements that I'd like to see in an energy package. I have introduced legislation along with Senator Alexander to encourage different forms of energy legislation that would in and of themselves help produce a cleaner environment and more energy independence. And we should all be exploring those types of mechanisms that will at the same time incentivize factory owners, manufacturers, and consumers to become more energy efficient and to fund research and development for technologies that will enable the safe and clean use of our country's vast fossil fuel and other resources. The second thing I would say, just as a comment, Mr. President, since I was shown a letter earlier today from the Chamber of Commerce strongly suggesting that the only viable alternative in this debate is the McConnell Amendment, I would like to enter into the record at this point without objection a letter that was sent last September by the Chamber of Commerce and more than a dozen other business entities, associations, in support of the Rockefeller Amendment.
Without objection.
I thank the Chair, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, let me first of all say to my good friend from Virginia that I agreed with everything he said up to the last 3 minutes. Because, you know, we have something that needs to be talked about. I would only make reference to the letter that has been entered into the record. That, yes, they did make that statement, that if the choice is to do nothing at all or to have the Rockefeller Amendment, it's better to delay something bad for 2 years. But that's not the choice. The choice is, and he's referred to as the McConnell Amendment, that happens to be the bill that I introduced and is now introduced as an amendment to the Small Business Act, is one that will actually resolve the problem. And I think it's necessary to set the record straight as to what the two alternatives really are. I call them cover. This is kind of a term that's used inside these halls. When someone's wanting to vote for something or vote against something that people at home want, they give them something else to vote for so we can offer cover, something that normally is meaningless, such as these two cover votes. Now, the cap and trade agenda, I think we all understand, is destroying jobs in America and certainly decreasing our domestic energy supply. And as a consequence, the consumers are going to pay more for their gas, for their electrical bills, in a tax on affordable energy, but it can be stopped. It can be stopped by the passage of the Energy Tax Prevention Act of 2011, or, as we're looking at now, that same bill encompassed as an amendment called Amendment Number 183 to the Small Business Act. Let me go back and, if I could, kind of in history to make sure that people understand where we are today and how we got here. Many years ago, back in the 90s, they came forward, and this is during the Clinton-Gore administration, with the Kyoto Treaty. They went to Kyoto, Japan, and said, we want to join with all the other countries, and we want to reduce emissions from CO2. And this was a treaty that you would sign on to, and most of the European countries did, many others did. I might add now, many years later, none of them who signed on to it were able to accomplish any kind of reduction, meaningful reduction in emissions. But nonetheless, we had that. Well, we spoke in this, I can remember standing here at this podium and saying back then that we're not going to ratify any agreement that is made at Kyoto that doesn't affect the developing countries the same as the developed countries. In other words, if it's not going to cover China and Mexico and different countries in Africa, then we don't want to be just the only ones that this affects, because it's going to be a very punitive thing. Secondly, we were not going to ratify any kind of a treaty that was an economic hardship on our country. Well, we successfully stopped it. Then along came, in 2003, they started introducing legislation that would do by legislation what the Kyoto Treaty would have done, but it would only affect the United States of America. Well, at that time, Republicans were a majority. I was the chairman of a committee that was called the Environment and Public Works Committee. We had the jurisdiction over this issue. And so I almost unilaterally was able to stop this from taking place, legislation. We had the same legislation that came up again in 2005, 2007, 2008, 2009, and it's been before us for votes now in the Senate 7 different times, and each time we defeated it. And I might add, Mr. President, defeated it by a larger margin each time that we defeated it. Now, it's kind of interesting because I've had so many people say to me, what if you're wrong? What if CO2 is damaging to the environment? So what if it causes some of these problems that people say it does? Well, I have to say that the science has been mixed on this. The science has been cooked in many cases. The United Nations, who came up with the IPCC, which was the science that is used to base all these new programs on, has been pretty much scandalized in the ClimateGate situation. But nonetheless, that's something that we don't really don't need to talk about. The point is that we were able to stop any legislation. Why did we want to stop legislation that put restrictions on CO2? Well, one reason is it came out very clear, and I always give my appreciation to Lisa Jackson. Lisa Jackson is the Obama-appointed director of the Environmental Protection Agency. I asked her the question some time ago in a public hearing, live on TV. Said, if we were to pass any of these pieces of legislation, at that time I think it was the Waxman-Markey bill, would this have any meaningful reduction in terms of CO2 emissions in the world? And the answer was no, it wouldn't, because this would only apply to the United States of America. And if we do it here, we'll take all the financial hardship of doing it. However, as we lose our manufacturing base, they go to other countries where there are less emission requirements. China is a good example. China's doors are open now to try to say, come, we're cranking out 3 or 4 coal-fired generating plants in China every week. So manufacturers come in here. We've got the energy that you need. So they were unable to do it. And when the Obama administration came in with a strong majority in both the House and the Senate, they said, all right, I'll tell you what, since you're not going to pass cap and trade, then we will do it through regulations. What would cap and trade do to America? Granted, by everyone's admission, it would not reduce emissions at all worldwide. So what would it cost? Well, the cost was put together back during the Kyoto Treaty by, it was the Wharton School at that time, since then MIT, CRA, many others have come in. The range is always between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, I'm not as smart as a lot of guys around here, so that when I hear about billions and trillions, I say, how does that really affect people in my state of Oklahoma? And so I have the math that I do. I say to the presiding officer right now, I take the total number of people and families in my state of Oklahoma who file a tax return, and then when they come up with something that's going to cost our nation $300 to $400 billion, I do the math. What that would amount to my average family in Oklahoma who files a tax return, it'd be $3,100 a year, and you don't get anything for it. So anyway, the president came in with a new majority, and he said, well, if you're not going to pass this, we're going to go ahead and do it by regulation. We'll have the Environmental Protection Agency do it by, regulation. So to do that, they had to have what is called an endangerment finding, and that is a finding that CO2 is an endangerment to health. Now, the courts never said that we have to regulate CO2. They said if you want to, you can, and that was the choice of this administration and of the Environmental Protection Agency. So I asked the question again at one of the hearings, and this is the same Administrator Jackson. I said, and this was a year ago, December, I said, I have a feeling you're going to come up with an endangerment finding so that you have justification for regulating CO2, and the same as if we were passing legislation to do it. And her response was kind of a smile. And I said, to have an endangerment finding, you have to base that on science. What science are you going to base it on? And she said, well, primarily the IPCC. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Well, that's the United Nations. They're the ones that started all this fun stuff. And so I said, with that, it was not more than 2 weeks later that the scandal broke with the recovery of some of the emails that were sent out by the IPCC that they had, in fact, cooked the science. So nonetheless, there are lawsuits that are pending right now and all that to try to stop the EPA from regulating CO2. Now, they're doing other regulatory things right now. They're trying to do regional haze regulation, trying to do regulation on in ozone, changing the standards, trying to do what they call boiler MAC, utility MAC, other regulations. But nonetheless, this one that we're talking about today is the regulation of greenhouse gases. So this is what is happening right now, and to keep them from doing it, I introduced a piece of legislation that was called the Energy Tax Prevention Act of 2011. My good friend over in the House of Representatives, Fred Upton, has been a friend of mine for many years. He's the chairman of the appropriate committee over there, the same as I'm the ranking member of the appropriate committee here. So we introduced together the Upman-Inhofe, or if you're over on this side, I call it the Inhofe-Upman legislation, that would take away the jurisdiction of the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate greenhouse gases. You take away the jurisdiction, they can't do it. That's the ultimate solution. That's the moment of truth, as you're going to read in tomorrow morning's Wall Street Journal. So they are taking that up. They'll pass it over there, but on a partisan basis over here, they'll try to kill it. So what we have done, Leader Mitch McConnell and I have introduced the amendment that encompasses my bill, the Prevention Act that I just referred to, and puts it onto an amendment on the Small Business Act. That is scheduled for a vote tomorrow morning. I hope it does happen. Now, the reason I'm talking today, I've already covered all this several times, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing it, but they have cover votes that are coming up. And we know that this is going to happen. But why is it that this administration wants to do something that is going to drive the energy costs of America upwards? This administration has said over and over again, they don't want gas, they don't want oil, they don't want coal, and you can't run this machine called America without oil, gas, and coal. Now, there is a motivation here, and that is, it's come from this administration, that they want to replace fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, with what they call green energy. Someday that might happen. It'll be long after I'm gone, I'm sure, but they might have the technology to run this country on what they call renewable energy. Right now, we're going to do as much as we can. We're for wind power, we're for sun power, solar power, all the other options. But nonetheless, we still have to have fossil fuels to run the country. Stephen Chu, Secretary of Energy for the Obama administration, said, and this is a quote, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels of Europe. That's $8 a gallon. This is the administration saying that we want to increase the price of gasoline to be equal to what that it is in Western Europe. And so this is something that it's something that has been a policy of this administration for a long time. In fact, President Obama himself said under this the cap-and-trade plan, this is what they're trying to do now, electricity prices would necessarily skyrocket. Well, the president had it right. The point of cap-and-trade regulation is to make you pay more for energy bills, and the Obama administration, the EPA, is here to make that happen. In a recent editorial, the Wall Street Journal calls the Energy Tax Prevention Act, that's my bill, quote, one of the best proposals for growth and job creation to make it onto the Senate docket in years. And why is that? It's because the EPA's regulations will raise energy prices and strangle the economic growth. As the National Association of Manufacturers stated, and this is a quote, they said, at a time, quote, at a time when our economy is attempting to recover from the most severe recession since the 1930s, EPA regulations will establish disincentives for the long-term investments necessary to grow jobs and expedite economic recovery, unquote. That's the National Association of Manufacturers. So we have the families, the workers, and the consumers are all going to feel the pain. In a study that Charles Rivers Associates did, the International estimates that the cap-and-trade regulations could increase wholesale electricity costs by 35 to 45%. Now, what we're talking about is everyone understands that if they are able to do these regulations, the EPA doing what the legislature refused to do, and that is regulate the emissions of fossil fuels, it will increase electricity prices about 40%. So what do we get in return? I think we've already mentioned that you don't get anything for this because it just would drive our jobs elsewhere, and it would only affect the United States of America. Now, the claims that the Energy Tax Prevention Act, that's the amendment that we'll be voting on tomorrow, would undermine health protections or fuel economy standards is disingenuous on the face. The amendment doesn't touch EPA's authorities to regulate criteria or hazardous air pollutants. What's more, both emissions of CO2 and the real pollution have been in steady decline, yet instances of asthma have been on the increase. So as the emissions decline, the incidence has actually increased. Carbon dioxide emissions don't cause asthma either directly or indirectly, and they don't harm public health. The Energy Prevention Act is not about asthma and public health, but it's about protecting jobs. And by the way, there is a very well-respected scientist by the name of Richard Lindzen from MIT, and he wrote a letter to me I just received a couple of days ago, and he said, well, it was actually a little bit longer ago than that. He said, quote, as to the impact of increased CO2 on general welfare, there is widespread agreement that modest warming should improve welfare for the United States. Under the circumstances, we are in the bizarre situation of declaring something to be a pollutant, CO2, when the evidence suggests that it is beneficial. In other words, you know, I hesitate saying this. I'm the first one to admit I'm not a scientist. But certainly Professor Lindzen is. He says, here we are talking about reducing something that is not a problem, it certainly is to the health. Then the other thing having to do with the highway, this is mentioned by the senator from Virginia just a few moments ago, that somehow this is going to impair our standards of lowering gas consumption. The amendment doesn't prohibit the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration from setting fuel economy standards for cars. It stops the EPA from regulating carbon dioxide from tailpipes after 2016. So the regulation, this would have no effect on that whatsoever. That is not done by the EPA. That's done by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, called NHTSA. The vote comes down to a simple choice. Are you for jobs and affordable energy? Or President Obama's strategy, energy taxes and bureaucratic regulations. Of course, when you look at the things that are coming along, I mentioned when I started talking that there are some things called cover, that if there's something that's out there that the people at home are clamoring for, that they want, and in this case they want this amendment that will stop the EPA from regulating greenhouse gases, then if they can vote for something else that does nothing, then they can say, well, that's why I voted for this. It's called cover. Now, the Rockefeller vote would be nothing except just kicking the can down the road for 2 years. In the meantime, the regulation goes on. Under the Baucus Amendment, this is something that's called the tailoring rule. It's a little more complicated because when you talk about the emissions that would be that we are concerned with, that the EPA would be regulating, they would be on any emissions that would affect all the farmers, the schoolhouses, and everybody else. Well, the Baucus Amendment would exempt some of these small ones. However, if you listen to the Farm Bureau, which has been very helpful in this all along, I think I have their quotes here. Yeah, it is right here. Now listen to this, Mr. President. Quote, this is the American Farm Bureau. This is a recent quote, just this year. Quote, farmers and ranchers would still incur the higher costs of compliance passed down from utilities, refineries, and fertilizer manufacturers that are directly regulated as of January 2nd, 2011. Well, so if the Baucus Amendment passes, it's going to still be regulating the refineries, the manufacturers, and that is going to be passed down, and it's going to be the increased cost of power and energy, and that's why the Farm Bureau is so emphatic. In fact, I just left the Farm Bureau just a couple of minutes ago before I came here and was talking about this very subject. Well, the manufacturers feel the same way. The Industrial Energy Consumers of America wrote the Baucus approach, quote, does not solve the underlying problem that regulating greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act is a very costly and for manufacturing, will impact global competitiveness and encourage capital investment outside of the United States. Why would that be? Because if China ends up with all of the jobs, then they're the ones who will be getting the investment. The only way to stop the higher cost of compliance, of which the Farm Bureau fears, is to pass the Energy Tax Prevention Act, which now is Senate Amendment number 183. So by contrast, it couldn't be starker. I think I was told that tomorrow morning you may see the moment of truth going on, and that's, I think, is going to be from the Wall Street Journal, that people are going to realize that there is only one way to stop this massive tax increase and regulation increase that will come. It won't be by the Rockefeller Amendment. It won't be by the Baucus Amendment. It'll be by the Inhofe-McConnell Amendment that hopefully will be voted on tomorrow. And that would take out from the jurisdiction of the EPA the ability to regulate greenhouse gases. That's what we're hoping will happen, and I think when people realize it, they're not going to be fooled by some of these, what I refer to as cover votes. With that, I yield the floor, Mr. President, and suggest the absence of